For 40 years, I painted my prayers on scrap wood in the corner of our garage, and for 40 years my husband called them clutter. I came home from Wednesday Bible study to find the shelves bare and a stranger's white van backing down our driveway, and through the open cargo doors I could see the creek baptism board sliding loose against a spare tire, the board I had painted the year my mother passed, riding away like somebody's cast off shelving. I did not scream. I have never been a screaming woman. I set my Bible and my covered dish down on the hood of my own car, and I walked up the driveway toward the folding card table where my husband Raymond sat in a lawn chair with a cigar box open on his knee. There was a sheet of cardboard taped to the front of that table. He had written on it with a fat black marker in the same careful print he used for the church softball roster. $5 each, it said. And under that, smaller, like an afterthought, garage cleanout. Everything must go. 40 years of my life, and he had summed it up in 3 words and a $. Odessa, he said, when he saw my face. He did not stand up. He tapped the lid of the cigar box like a man tapping a table when he wants you to sit down and be reasonable. Before you start, I gave you every chance to deal with all that yourself. You never did. So, I dealt with it. I looked past him at the shelves I had built with my own hands out of cinder blocks and pine planks, 3 rows of them along the back wall of the garage, and every row was empty. 60 boards had stood on those shelves that morning when I left for study. I know it was 60 because I had counted them the week before, dusting each one with a dry paintbrush, like my mother with the good china nobody was allowed to eat off of. 60 that morning. I would learn, before the sun went down, that 19 of them were already gone, scattered into the trunks of strangers, and that the cigar box on my husband's knee held $95 in soft, folded bills. $5 a board. 41 still leaned in the cardboard boxes at his feet, waiting their turn. Raymond, my voice came out lower than I meant it to. Where is the one with the creek? He knew the one. Everybody who ever set foot in our garage knew the one, even if they pretended not to look. A wide plywood board, 4 feet across, the grain still showing through in places where I had let it. A brown river the color of sweet tea. A preacher in white up to his waist, and an old woman going down backward into the water with her arms crossed over her chest. And all along the muddy bank the church in their Sunday clothes with their mouths open, singing. You could not hear them. But you knew, looking at it, exactly what they were singing. I had painted my own mother into that bank crowd, 3rd from the left, in the yellow hat she wore to Easter. I painted it the spring she died, because painting was the only place I could still put her where she would stand still and let me look at her. The big one? Raymond glanced at the van, which had reached the street now and was pulling away. Some young fella took a stack of them, loaded up his van. That river one was right on top. He shrugged, and the shrug is the part I still see when I close my eyes. Not a cruel shrug, a comfortable one. Told you nobody wanted them but you, and turns out I was wrong. Fella gave me $30 cash without blinking. I'd call that a good afternoon. Raymond, those were not yours to sell. And here is where he said the thing. He said it easy, like telling a child the sky is blue, and he said it loud enough that the 2 neighbor women picking through my boxes could hear it. Because Raymond has never in his life lowered his voice for me. Odessa, it's garage clutter. Nobody but you ever wanted it, and now I've got room for the cart. It's done. The cart. That was what all of this was about. Raymond had bought himself a golf cart, a shining white one with green seats and a little roof, because 3 of the men from his Saturday foursome had bought them, and Raymond does not do well being the 4th man without one. It had been sitting in the driveway under a tarp for 2 weeks because there was no room in the garage. There was no space for it because of me. So he had made room. I would love to tell you that I said something that put him in his place, that I turned over the card table and took my $95 back and drove to that young man's house and demanded my mother's face out of his van. I did none of that. I stood in my own driveway in my good navy dress, the deaconess pin still on my collar from leading the study, and I felt the whole neighborhood watching to see what the Grant woman was going to do. I picked up one of the cardboard boxes at his feet. 41 boards left, and the top one was a little painting of my grandmother's clothesline, blue work shirt snapping on a July wind. I held it against my chest with both arms, a child too big to be held, and I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table. Then I went back for another, and another. I moved my own life out of my husband's yard sale one board at a time while the neighbor women decided, all at once, that they had somewhere else to be. Raymond called after me twice. The first time he said, "Now you're being dramatic." The second time he said, "Odessa, I am talking to you." I did not answer either time. I have learned that there are moments when the most honest thing your mouth can do is stay shut. Because whatever comes out of it in that first hot minute is not the thing the Lord would have you say. So I carried boards. 41 trips would have been too many. I stacked them 4 to an arm and I made 11 trips. And by the time the streetlights came on, I had every board that was left standing against the wall of our bedroom, and the cigar box was still on Raymond's knee out in the dark with its $95, and the creek was gone. That night I did not cry where he could hear me. I ran the bath and I sat on the edge of the tub with the water going so the sound would cover me, and I said the only prayer I had in me, which was not really a prayer. Just my mother's name, and then the Lord's name, over and over, like a knock on a door when you are too tired to knock properly. If you have ever made something with your own 2 hands and had somebody you love put a garage sale price on it, then you already know the exact weight I carried up those bedroom stairs, and I would like you to stay with me clear to the end of this, because I promise you, the story does not end in that bathroom. But before I can tell you where it ends, before I can tell you about the woman in the gray suit who came looking for the artist, and the check that made my husband sink onto the garage step with his face in his hands, I have to take you back to the very start. Because to understand what those $5 boards really were, you have to understand where they came from. And you have to meet the girl who started painting them 40 years before anybody offered her a dime. Her name was Odessa, too. She just didn't know yet what her hands were worth. I was 21 years old the first time I mixed a color that made me cry. I had been married to Raymond 1 year. We were living in the little rented half of a house over on Pearl Street, and I had a job cleaning rooms at the Dixon Motor Lodge out on the highway. And Raymond was selling appliances at the Sears in those days, already dreaming out loud about the day he would manage the whole store, then the whole district, then who knew what. He was handsome, and he talked like the future was a thing you could order out of a catalog. I believed every word. The color was a brown. I had bought a child's paint set at the drugstore for 89 cents, meaning only to touch up a water stain on a second-hand dresser so it wouldn't show. But I got to mixing the browns to match the wood, and I put too much red in one, and all of a sudden the color on my finger was the exact brown of the river back home in Toliga County, the Cahaba running low in August. The water I was baptized in when I was 9 years old, with the whole of Mount Moriah singing me up out of it. I sat down on the floor of that rented kitchen, and I cried, because I had not known you could keep a thing like that. I had thought when you left a place, the place was gone. And here it was, the whole river, sitting on the tip of my finger. I never did fix the dresser. I painted the river onto the back of the dresser drawer instead, where nobody would see it. And that was the first one. Raymond thought it was cute, at first. That is the part people never believe when I tell this story. In the beginning, he thought it cute like a stray kitten, which is to say he liked it right up until it wanted something from him. When I asked for $2 to buy real brushes, he laughed and gave me $1 and told me not to make a project out of it. The trouble came the first time I hung one where people could see it. I had finished a little painting of the river at dawn, and I was so proud of it that I hung it on the nail in the front room where his bowling trophy used to sit, and I went off to Sunday service floating an inch above the floor. When I came home, the painting was gone. There was a mirror on the nail now, a big oval one with a gold plastic frame from the discount store, and my river was lying face down on top of the icebox. Raymond? I stood in the front room in my good church dress. Where is my painting? He came in from the kitchen with a sandwich in his hand. Right there on the icebox. It's fine, I didn't hurt it. You took it down. I put the mirror up. Makes the room look twice as big, see that? He waved the sandwich at it, pleased with himself. My mother always said a mirror in a small room does the work of a window. I hung that this morning. I was proud of it. He looked at me then like I had said something a little embarrassing. Odessa, baby, think about it a second. The Hendersons are coming Friday. Frank Henderson is about to make me assistant manager. They walk in this house and the first thing they lay eyes on is a hunk of scrap wood with a river painted on it. What are they going to think? That we can't afford a real picture off a real wall? He took a bite. A mirror says something. A mirror says we're doing all right. Your painting's not going anywhere. Keep it in the bedroom. Paint all you want. I just can't have it be the first thing people see. That's all I'm saying. And what am I? I said it low. Am I the first thing people see when they walk in? Or do I go in the bedroom too? He laughed. That is the piece I have kept clearest all these years later. He thought I was making a joke, so he laughed, and he kissed the top of my head on his way to his recliner, and he never once knew that I had just asked him the realest question of our whole marriage, and that he had gone and answered it with a gold plastic mirror. I took my river off the icebox. I carried it out to the garage and I stood it on the workbench in the east corner. And through the doorway I could see that mirror on the nail, reflecting the empty front room back at itself, and I made a decision a wiser young woman might not have made. I decided I would not fight him for the front of the house. He could have the part that faced the street, the part that told the Hendersons we were doing all right. I would keep the corner. The 5 o'clock, the part that faced God. I told myself it was the better end of the bargain, and for a long time I made myself believe it. So I learned to paint where he would not have to look. That is how the garage started. When we bought this house in 1989, the first house we ever owned, Raymond claimed the den for his recliner and his trophies from the men's league. And he gave me, with a wave of his hand like he was handing me the keys to a kingdom, the corner of the garage. There was a workbench nobody used and a window that faced east, and I was grateful. I truly was. I set up my boards on that workbench, and I did not ask for one more inch of that house for 36 years. Every morning I got up at 5. Not because that hour is holy, though I have come to believe it is, but because 5 was the 1 hour of the day that belonged to nobody but me and the Lord. Raymond slept till 7. The world did not start needing things from me till the coffee was on. So from 5 to 7, in that east-facing corner with the light coming up gray and then gold across whatever board I had going, I painted. I painted the creek. I painted my grandmother's clothesline and the cotton field going purple at dusk, and the church picnic under the pecan trees with the deacons turning the ice cream crank. I painted the county I came from, which was poor and beautiful and mostly torn down now. And I painted it not to sell it and not to hang it in a gallery, because it never once crossed my mind that galleries would ever have to do with me. I painted like some people pray with their eyes closed, and I prayed with a brush in my hand. Every board was a thank you I had no other tongue for. 40 years of 5 o'clocks. That is what was standing on those shelves. That is what my husband marked down to $5 and set out by the mailbox next to a broken weed trimmer, so he would have somewhere to park a golf cart he did not need. To impress 3 men who would not have crossed the street to help him move a couch. Now, I could stop here and let you think the worst of him, and I would not blame you. But I told you I was going to tell you the whole thing, and the whole thing includes what I did in the days after, which was nothing that would look like fighting. The morning after the yard sale, I rose at 5 like always. There was no board on the workbench anymore. I had moved every one of them into the bedroom, and there was no painting in there with Raymond asleep. So I sat in the cold garage on the metal stool, and I drank my coffee looking at the pale rectangles on the wall where the shelves had shaded the paint from the sun. 60 ghosts. That is the closest I came to weeping that week, looking at those clean rectangles. Sunday, I put my tithe in the plate the same as any other Sunday. Hear me on that, because that hinge is what the whole rest of this turns on. Raymond had cleared $95 off my life's work and never offered me a nickel from it, and I still counted out my tithe from my own little checking account, and I laid it down and never made a face about it. My mother used to say, you do not tithe the good weeks. Anybody can tithe the good weeks. You tithe the week your heart is broken, because that is the week you find out whether you believed any of it in the first place. I believed it. That was the only thing I was sure of that week. Everything else about my 40 years I had started to doubt, but I was sure of that. That first Sunday, Sister Vernell Biggs found me in the fellowship hall setting out the coffee. And Vernell has known me since we were girls in Platts, and there is no hiding from a woman who knew you before you learned to hide. Odessa Grant, she said, low, setting her purse down on the table. What is wrong with you this morning? And do not say nothing, because your nothing has got a whole face on it. I'm all right, Vernell. She started stacking cups beside me, close, so we could talk up under the noise of the crowd. Ella Fontaine's granddaughter told me there was a yard sale over your way this week. Said Raymond had a whole table of your paintings out by the road with a sign on it. That true? I kept setting out cups. It's true. He sell any? Some, Odessa. She put her hand flat over mine so it stopped moving. How many is some? 19, I said. $5 apiece to make room for the golf cart. And I heard my own voice come out flat like you report a thing that happened to somebody else, because I could not yet afford to say it any other way and stay standing. Vernell is not a quiet woman by nature. I watched her want to say about 6 different things, and I watched her swallow every one, because she is a good friend and she could see I was holding on by a thread. You want me to send Deacon Biggs over there to have a word with him? Is what she finally said. That pulled the first small laugh out of me all week. No, Vernell, I do not need your husband fighting my husband in my driveway. Wouldn't be a fight. Raymond would talk him to death before it came to blows. And that got a bigger laugh out of me, and she squeezed my hand and got serious. Now you listen to me. You are not going to sit down in this hurt and let it turn into something ugly, you hear? That man has been stepping on your light for 40 years and you have never one time let it make you mean, and this is not the week you start. You keep on serving. You keep your own counsel and let the Lord keep his, and you let me carry a little of the weight, because that is what I am here for. She handed me the last stack of cups. Now, are we putting out the good coffee or the church coffee? Church coffee, I said. It's 5th Sunday, not Christmas. That's my girl. I never did tell Vernell about the creek board. I could not get the words for that one up out of my chest. But I gave her the number, and she carried it. And all through service she sat in the pew right behind me, and every little while I would feel her hand come to rest on my shoulder from behind. Just a second, just long enough to say I know, I have got you. And then lift away again. The Lord gives you certain friends so you can bear the people He gave you to love. And notice what I did not do that Sunday, because it is the whole of who my mother raised me to be. I did not stand up in that fellowship hall and tell one soul what my husband was, not because I lacked the words. Because a wound you keep holding up for everybody to look at never gets the quiet it needs to close. To tell you why the doubt was so heavy, I have to show you what those boards had done for people, because I had never once thought of them as mine to keep. From the very start, they went out the door faster than I could make them. The first one I ever gave away was to Miss Ella Fontaine, 3 houses down, the year her husband Cornelius died in his sleep on a Tuesday in April. I barely knew her, but I knew he used to sit on his porch every evening with a transistor radio listening to the Braves, and I knew the sound of that little radio was gone from the street now, and I could not stand it. So I painted his porch, the green chair, the radio on the rail, the light going down orange behind the water oak. I wrapped it in a dish towel, and I knocked on her door, and I said, "Miss Ella, I made you something, and if you don't want it, you can throw it in the trash, and I will never mention it again." She unwrapped it standing in her doorway. She looked at that green chair a long time. Then she put her hand flat over her mouth, and she said, "You put the radio in it." And she cried in a way I have only ever seen widows cry, which is quiet and total, like rain that has decided to stay all day. She hung that painting over her mantel, and she told everyone at the funeral repast that Odessa Grant had given her back her husband's porch. That is when the church learned what I did in my garage, not because I told them, because Miss Ella did. After that they came, not asking, exactly. Word would reach me sideways, through the deaconess board or the prayer list, that somebody was hurting, and I would go home and get up the next morning at 5 and start a board. When Deacon Pruitt's granddaughter was born 3 months early and lived 7 weeks in the county hospital in a plastic box with tubes in her, I painted the little thing not as she was, but as she should have been, fat and laughing in a field of the orange Indian paintbrush that grew wild in Toliga. Her mother, Tanya, a girl barely 22, kept that board on the windowsill of that hospital room, and the nurses told her later it was the only thing in the room they ever saw her smile at. The baby did not live. The painting went in the little casket. Tanya asked me for it, and I said yes before she finished the sentence, and I painted her another one for the empty nursery, and I have never once regretted a board I could not get back. That is the part Raymond never understood, and it is the part that matters most. He counted the boards like inventory. 60 on the shelf, 30 gone. So much lumber, so much paint, so much of Odessa's time he could have had for himself. But for every one I kept, 3 or 4 went out the door to somebody with a hole in their life the shape of a person. I never counted those. You do not count a thing you gave to God to give to somebody else. I taught the little ones, too. Every summer the church ran a 2-week vacation Bible school, and while the other women did the crafts with the popsicle sticks and the glitter glue, I set up in the fellowship hall basement with a stack of my scrap boards and a coffee can of brushes, and I taught the children how to mix a color, not how to draw. Any fool can be taught to draw. I taught them that green is not a color you buy. Green is a thing that happens when yellow and blue forgive each other, and that if you want the green of new corn, you use more yellow, and if you want the green of a storm coming, you use more blue, and that the most important color in any picture is the one you cannot name. Some of those children are grown now with children of their own. 2 of them went on to art school. One of them, a boy named Deshaun, who could not sit still for anything but a paintbrush, teaches high school art over in the next county and still calls me every year on my birthday. The first summer Deshaun came down to that basement, he was 8 years old and mad at the whole world, the kind of boy the other teachers ran out of patience with by 9 o'clock and sent to me because I was the last stop before they called his grandmother. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed up high on his chest. "I don't do painting," he said. "Paintings for girls." That's so. I did not look up from the board I had going. "Then you go on and sit in that chair by the wall and don't do any, and I promise I will not make you." He sat, arms still crossed, chin down, daring me to fuss at him. He lasted maybe 5 minutes before he drifted over to my elbow, close, like children who have decided to be curious and do not want you to catch them at it. "What's that supposed to be?" he said. "You tell me. It's just brown." "It is just brown." I kept working. "So, what do you want it to be?" He chewed on that a while. "A dog," he said finally, and his whole voice changed when he said it, went down soft. "A brown dog. My mama says we can't have one where we stay." So I set a fresh scrapboard in front of him, and I put a brush in his hand, and I did not teach him to draw a dog, because you cannot draw your way to a thing you love that hard. I taught him to mix the brown. Now that brown you call just brown, I said there's no such thing as just brown. "Look here." I put a little red in it. What did it do? His eyes went wide. It got warm. It got warm. That there's a summer dog, a dog been laying in a sunny yard all afternoon. Now watch this. I touched the blue in. What about now? It went cold. Kind of gray. That's a dog out in the rain, waiting on his boy to come home from school. Same brown, Deshaun. You decide, is he warm or is he cold? You are the one holds the sun. You understand what I am telling you? Nobody in this world can make you cold unless you let them hold your sun. I had no idea I was preaching to myself. I thought I was talking about a dog. He painted a warm one. He painted the warmest brown dog you ever saw, laying in a yellow yard, and he carried it home wet because he would not wait for it to dry, and his grandmother told me later he slept with it on the pillow next to his head. And that was the summer Deshaun stopped getting sent to the last stop, because he had found the one thing he could sit still for. None of that was ever for sale. I need you to understand how completely it was not for sale, because there was a man once who tried to buy it. This was maybe 15 years back. There is a flea market that runs on Saturdays out at the old fairgrounds, and I used to go for the fresh peaches and the church cookbook table. There was a dealer out there, a heavy-set white man with a gray ponytail and a booth full of what he called primitives, old signs and rusted tools and other people's grandmother's quilts, and somehow he had heard about the church lady who painted. He tracked me down between the peaches and the parking lot. He had a business card and a way of talking fast so you would agree before you understood. "I hear you do folk stuff," he said. "Country scenes, religious, that kind of thing. I got buyers up in the city eat that up. Tell you what, you bring me a stack, I'll give you 20 aboard cash, no questions, and I'll move them. You could do this in your sleep. Easy money. $20 aboard." In that moment it was more money than anybody had ever named at me for a painting, and I will not pretend a part of me did not sit up and listen, because we were not rich, and $20 was $20. "What would you do with them?" I asked him. "Sell 'em. Frame 'em up nice, double the price, everybody's happy." He grinned. "It's a business, sweetheart. Product moves. Money comes in." Product. I stood there in the peach smell, and I thought about Miss Ella's green chair and Tanya's baby in the field of paintbrush. And I understood that this man was offering to turn my prayers into product, to frame them up nice and sell my mother's river to a stranger in the city who would hang it in a powder room because it matched the towels. "Thank you," I told him, "but they are not merchandise. They are testimony. And you cannot put a price on a testimony, because the minute you do, it stops being true." He looked at me like I had turned down free money, which I had. He left his card on the peach table. I did not take it. I drove home and I told Raymond about it that night at supper, thinking, God help me, that he would be proud that a real dealer had come after his wife's work. Raymond put down his fork. "You turned down 20 aboard?" He said it slow, like I had confessed to something. "Odessa, you got, what, 40 of those things stacked in there? That's $800. You turned down $800 because it's testimony?" He shook his head and picked his fork back up. "That right there is why we'll never get ahead. You'd rather give it away than sell it. It's a sickness with you people. No offense. You people." He meant my family, my church, my county, my whole way of being in the world, and he said no offense like men say it when they have just said the most offensive thing they know how to say. I gave him no answer. I cleared the plates, but I put a mark against that day in my heart. One of 1,000 such marks. And if you had asked me that night whether Raymond Grant would ever in his life understand what those boards were, I would have told you no. And I would have been right for 15 more years. Now here is the thing I did not know. The thing that was happening while I was carrying boards into my bedroom and putting my tithe in the plate and looking at the ghost rectangles on the garage wall. The creek was on the move. The young man who filled his van at Raymond's yard sale was named Wyatt. I would meet him later, and I will get to that, but on that Wednesday, he was just a picker, 26 years old. The kind of young man who drives around on his day off buying whole estate lots and garage sale leftovers on a bet, looking for the one thing in 100 that is worth more than he paid. He had stopped at Raymond's table because the golf cart caught his eye, thinking maybe it was for sale. It was not. But then, he saw the boards. He told me later he did not know what he was looking at. He only knew that the River One made the hair stand up on his arms, and that when he turned it over in his hands the back was raw plywood with a date and a few words written in pencil in a slanted hand, and that $30 for a vanload of that feeling seemed like the deal of his life. So he took them. He did not think about it again until that night, when he set the creek board up on the mantel of his rented apartment and could not stop looking at it. Wyatt had a friend from high school, a woman named Priscilla, who had gone off and gotten an art degree and now worked the front desk at a little gallery downtown, the kind that sells watercolors to tourists. He sent her a picture of the creek board on his phone with a message that said, "Is this anything, or am I crazy?" She wrote back one word: "Come." When Wyatt carried that board into the gallery the next morning, the owner happened to be standing there, and the owner had spent 30 years selling pretty pictures and knew in his bones the difference between a pretty picture and the other thing, the rare thing, the thing that stops a room. He did not try to buy it. He was too honest, or too smart, or both. He said, "This is not for me, but I know exactly who this is for." And he made a phone call, and the phone rang on the desk of a woman named Dr. Camille Reyes, who was the chief curator of the state's Fine Art Museum, 40 minutes up the interstate, and who had spent her entire career looking for exactly this and almost never finding it. She drove down that same afternoon. She stood in that little tourist gallery in her gray suit, with her reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and she looked at a 4-foot plywood board painted by a woman she had never heard of. A baptism in a brown river with an old church singing on the bank, and she did the thing that I am told she almost never does, which is that she went quiet, dead quiet, for a long stretch. Then she turned the board over and she read the pencil writing on the back, the slanted hand, the date, the few words. And she took a photograph of that writing with her phone, and she said to the gallery owner, in a voice that was not quite steady, "I need to find out who made this. I have to find her, and then every last board that went out that door, because there is no earthly chance this is the only one." There were 41 more, leaning against the wall of my bedroom, and I had no notion that a woman in a gray suit 40 minutes up the interstate had just made it her mission to find every last board my husband had priced at $5. If you had knocked on my door that next week, you would not have found a woman who knew any of this. You would have found a woman losing her grip on the one thing that had held her up for 40 years, and you would have found a man who had decided, now that the garage was empty, to fill it as loudly as he could. Raymond had the cart moved in by Friday. He did more than move it in. He rented a floor buffer from the hardware store, and he stripped and repainted the whole garage floor a battleship gray with little sparkle flecks in it. And he ran a string of shop lights across the ceiling. And he mounted the golf cart up on the very spot where my workbench had stood for 36 years. The east corner. The corner with the good morning light. He hung a framed photograph of himself with his foursome on the wall where my shelves had been. He was proud of it in a way I had not seen him proud of anything in years. He walked me out there Saturday morning to show me, one hand on the small of my back like an usher, and he said, "Now doesn't that look like something? You can eat off that floor." "It looks very clean," I said. "See, that's your problem." He was still smiling, but the smile had teeth in it now. "I do something nice, make the place presentable, and the best you can give me is it looks clean." Louise's husband put in one of these, and she about threw him a parade. I did not tell him that Louise's husband had not built his showroom on top of his wife's life. I said the floor looked very clean, again, and I went back in the house, and behind me I heard him start the cart up and idle it, just to hear it run in his beautiful gray room. The next Thursday was the men's league banquet at the club, and Raymond made me come. He liked to have me there for the banquets, in my good clothes, because a wife in good clothes said something about a man to the other men. I went because I have always gone, and because 41 years of marriage teaches you which hills are worth the climb, and which ones you just walk around. We sat at a round table with the Pruitts, not the church Pruitts, the other Pruitts, and with Raymond's foursome, and their wives, and there was chicken, and there was a man with a microphone, giving out little trophies, and it should have been a nothing evening. It became one of the worst of my life, and it did so over dessert, when Raymond decided to be funny. Bill Dabney, one of the foursome, had asked me, kindly enough, what I did with my time now that I was retired from the motel. And I had started to say that I painted, when Raymond cut across me like a man swatting a fly off his plate. "Oh, don't get her started." He laughed, and the table laughed with him because he was the one buying the second round. "My wife's an artist. You didn't know that, Bill? Big-time artist. Paints little pictures out in the garage, church scenes, cotton fields, all that." He was rolling now, warming his hands at the fire of their attention. "I had to clear a whole van load of them out last month, just to park the cart. Sold the lot for $5 a piece, and honestly I think I overcharged." The table laughed again, louder, and one of the wives, Carol, put her hand on my arm and said, "Oh, Odessa, he's terrible," but she was laughing too, and Raymond was not finished. "You want to know the best part?" He leaned in. "She gives them away. 40 years. And she's never made a dime, because every time somebody's dog dies, she paints them a picture of the dog and hands it over for free. I keep telling her, Odessa, we could have sent the grandkids to college on what you've handed out to church folks. But that's my wife. Give away the shirt off my back. This one. He raised his glass to me, and the whole table raised theirs, and I sat there in my good navy dress, with a deaconess pin on my collar, and I smiled the smile you learn to smile. And under the table my hands were folded so tight my rings cut into me. I did not make a scene. But something came loose in me that night, quietly, like a shelf pulling loose from a wall one screw at a time, and you do not know it is going until the whole thing comes down. It was not the yard sale that did it. It was the laughing. It was hearing 40 years of 5 o'clocks turned into the punchline of a chicken dinner. And worse, it was watching how good it felt to him, how the mockery of me was a warm coat he pulled around his shoulders before the men he wanted to be. On the drive home he was in a fine mood. "You're too sensitive," he said, when he glanced over and saw my face in the dashboard light. "It's called breaking the ice. People love that stuff. You've got to learn to laugh at yourself, Odessa, and I'm telling you, for your own sake, you need to quit handing those things out at church. It's starting to look like charity. Like we can't afford to give a proper gift, so my wife hands out lumber. It embarrasses me. Bill Dabney's wife gave the Hollises a crystal bowl. What do you give? Junk you painted in the garage. Just, please, for me. Quit 40 years. And there it was in one word, the same as the marker on the cardboard, the whole of me marked down and set out by the mailbox. I did not answer him. When we got home, I went up to the bedroom where my 41 boards leaned against the wall, and I sat on the floor in front of them in my good dress, and I looked at them for a long time. My grandmother's clothesline. The cotton rose at dusk. The pecan tree picnic with the deacons at the ice cream crank. The paintbrush field with no baby in it. Every one a thank you. And I heard that whole table laughing, and for the first time in my life I looked at my own work, and I let his eyes be my eyes, and through his eyes I saw lumber. I saw clutter. I saw an old woman's foolishness that had cost her grandchildren a college fund. There is a line in Ecclesiastes I had read 100 times and never once believed, until that night. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. I knelt down on the bedroom floor and I said, "Lord, was it? Was it just vanity? All of it. All 40 years, an old woman playing with paint in a garage and calling it prayer to make herself feel like she mattered? Because if it was vanity, you let me carry it a long way before you told me." And he stayed silent that night. I have had times in my life when the answer came like sunrise, sure and slow and warm, and this was not one of them. This was silence. So I did the thing you do when you cannot hear God and cannot bear your own house. I got the hard-sided suitcase down from the closet shelf, the blue one we took to Niagara Falls in 1992, and I laid my brushes in it, all of them, the good sable ones I had saved for, and the cheap bristle ones worn down to nubs, and my tubes and my little glass jars and my palette knife, and I closed it, and I slid it under the bed where I would not have to see it. I did not throw them away. I did not have it in me to throw them away. But I put them where a thing goes when you have stopped believing you will need it again, and I turned off the light, and I lay down next to my husband, who was already asleep, and who slept that night, like a man with a clean conscience and a clean garage floor. I did not get up at 5 the next morning. For the first time in 40 years, I slept till the coffee needed making, and the east light came up gold across an empty corner of a garage that now held a golf cart, and there was no one there to catch it. What I did not know, lying in that dark, was that Dr. Camille Reyes had spent that same week driving in circles trying to find me. She had started with Wyatt. The gallery owner had his number, and Wyatt, when she called, was happy to help and useless at once, as the young often are. He remembered the yard sale. He remembered it was a Wednesday, and he recalled a golf cart out front, and the man running it was older and talkative and glad to be rid of the boards. But he had paid cash, so there was no name, no card, no receipt. And he had a general idea of the neighborhood but not the street, because he had been driving that whole side of the county that day, hitting sales. Dr. Reyes is a patient woman. She had Wyatt drive her through the neighborhood one evening. The two of them creeping down street after street looking for a house with a golf cart in a spotless garage, and they did not find it, because by then Raymond had the door closed. She tried other ways. She called the county and asked, feeling foolish, whether anyone knew of an older woman, likely black, likely church-going, who painted folk scenes of a rural county, baptisms and cotton and pecan trees. She got nowhere. She even called a few of the larger churches and asked, and one church secretary said it sounded a little like a member of theirs, but she could not give out personal information over the phone to a stranger, which was the right thing for that woman to do, and which cost me another 3 days I never knew I was losing. And one time, she got close enough to touch it. She had traced the general area to our zip code, and she did what a determined woman does, which is, she started calling the listed numbers, the landlines, the old ones, asking the same careful question. She called our house on a Tuesday afternoon. Raymond answered, because I was at the church folding programs for the 5th Sunday service. Grant residence, he said. And a woman's voice, professional, warm, said, Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Camille Reyes. I'm the curator at the State Museum of American Art, and I'm trying to locate an artist who paints folk scenes, possibly someone in your area. Older woman, religious subjects, cotton fields, river baptisms. I'm sorry to call cold like this. Does that ring any bell at all? And my husband, my Raymond, who had a golf cart in the garage and a clean conscience, and a story he liked to tell at banquets, laughed into the phone. Lady, he said, you've got a wrong number and a wild goose. Ain't no artist at this house. And he hung up, and he did not mention it to me, not that night, not that week, because to him it was nothing, a telemarketer, a crank, a wild goose. He threw the goose away with both hands and never knew what he was holding. I have thought about that phone call more than any other single minute in this whole story. My whole life turned on a wire that afternoon, and I was 40 feet from the phone folding programs at the church. And my husband caught the call and threw it in the trash. If the Lord had not been in it, that would have been the end. There would be no museum and no exhibition and no reason for me to be telling you any of this. It would have died right there. An old woman's paintings scattered into strangers' trunks. A curator's dead end. A marriage grinding on gray and clean and empty. But I have learned that the Lord is not in the habit of losing what belongs to Him. He had one board left on the loose, one creek, one baptism, and He was not done with it. Because Wyatt, driving home from that fruitless evening of creeping past strange garages, had gotten to talking with Dr. Reyes about where he had been that day, and he had mentioned, offhand, that before the golf cart sale, he had hit a church rummage sale 2 streets over, and that a lady there had recognized his description of the river painting. She had said, "Oh, that sounds like Sister Odessa's work. She paints. She gave one to my mother." Wyatt had not thought anything of it, but Dr. Reyes, who missed nothing, had written down one word on the back of her hand in ballpoint pen. Odessa. It is not a common name. It did not take her long, after that, to find out that there was a deaconess named Odessa Grant at a church across town, and that her husband's name was Raymond, and that they lived on the very street she and Wyatt had crept down in the dark, in the house with the clean, closed garage. She came on a Saturday. I remember it was a Saturday because Raymond was out back with the hose washing the cart, which he did every Saturday now, like other men wash a car they love. I was at the kitchen sink shelling peas when I saw the gray sedan slow down out front, check the number on our mailbox, and pull into the drive. A woman got out, gray suit, sensible shoes, reading glasses up in her hair, a leather folder held against her chest like something she was afraid of dropping. She stood a moment looking at the house, and then she walked up and rang the bell, and I heard Raymond come around the side of the house wiping his hands on a rag. I did not go to the door right away. I have learned to let Raymond meet the strangers first, because he likes to, and because most strangers at our door are selling something. So I stood at the sink with the window cracked, and I heard the whole first part of it. "Afternoon," Raymond said, in his salesman voice, the one that could sell a Kenmore to a woman who already had one. "Good afternoon. I'm so sorry to come by unannounced." The woman's voice was careful, like a person stepping across a creek on stones. "My name is Dr. Camille Reyes. I'm the chief curator at the State Museum of American Art. I'm looking for the artist who lives at this address. She paints folk scenes, river baptisms, cotton fields. I believe her name is Odessa." There was a pause, and then my husband laughed, the same laugh I had heard on the phone without knowing it, the same laugh from the banquet table. "Oh, you must be the one that called here a while back. Listen, I don't know who's been pulling your leg, but there's no artist here. My wife messes around with some paint in the garage, that's all. Little pictures, church stuff. I cleaned most of it out a while back, sold it at a yard sale." He chuckled. "You drove all this way down here for that?" "Somebody owes you a tank of gas, Doctor." I set down my bowl of peas. "Here is what 40 years of being made small will do to a woman, so you understand why I did not fly to that door. It does not make you loud. It makes you quiet. So quiet you can stand at your own sink and hear a stranger call you an artist, and hear your husband call you nothing in the same breath, and not know, for a second, which one of them is telling the truth." I had to walk to that door on legs that did not feel like mine. I had to reach past Raymond's shoulder to push the screen open, and I had to make my mouth say, "I'm Odessa. I'm the one who paints." Dr. Reyes looked at me, and her face did something I had not seen a stranger's face do about me in my whole life. It opened. Her eyes filled, right there on my front step, and she pressed her lips together, and she said, "Mrs. Grant, my name is Camille. I have been looking for you for 3 weeks. She held the leather folder a little tighter. "May I show you something?" She opened the folder against her forearm and turned it toward me, and it was a photograph, printed large and clean on glossy paper, of the back of a plywood board. Raw wood. And there in the corner, in pencil, in my own slanted hand, the words I put on the back of every board I have ever made, because my grandmother taught me you sign your work to God, not to men. It said, "To him who gave me the eyes," Odessa, and a date. The spring my mother died. "This is the back of a painting of a baptism," Camille said quietly. "A brown river, a church singing on the bank. A young man bought it 3 weeks ago at a driveway sale on this street for $5, and it has not left my mind for a single hour since I first saw it. Mrs. Grant, I have been a curator for 26 years. I have handled Bill Traylor. I have hung Clementine Hunter and Minnie Evans. And I am telling you, standing on your porch, that the painter of this board is one of the most important self-taught American artists I have ever come across, and your name did not reach me until Thursday, and I would very much like to see whatever else you have made before anyone else sells any more of it for $5. Behind me, I heard Raymond say, "Now hold on." But it was a small sound. It was the first small sound I had ever heard him make. I did not say anything grand. I looked at the penciled words on my own board, to him, who gave me the eyes, and I heard them read out loud by a stranger who had driven 40 minutes to say them to me, and 40 years of dawns came up in my throat, all at once. I said, "They're in the bedroom." He moved my shelves out for the golf cart, so I keep them in the bedroom now. And I heard Raymond make the small sound again. I took her up to the bedroom. Camille Reyes walked into that room where 41 boards leaned against the wall, and she stopped in the doorway like you stop when you walk into a sanctuary and the lights are low. She did not touch anything. She asked, "May I?" And I said yes, and she began to go through them, one at a time, tilting each toward the window light, and she was quiet for so long that Raymond, who had followed us up and was standing in the hall, could not stand it and said, "They're just scenes, from down where she's from." "They are not just scenes," Camille said, without turning around. She had my grandmother's clothesline in her 2 hands. "Do you see how she's laid the blue of the work shirts against the white of the sheets? Do you see that she has painted the wind? Most trained painters cannot paint the wind. Your wife painted the wind on a piece of scrap plywood with a drugstore brush, and she has done it 40 times in this room, and there is not one weak board in the stack." She set the clothesline down, as gently as you would lay down a sleeping child. She turned around. She had tears standing in her eyes, and she did not wipe them. And she looked straight at Raymond when she said the next part. "Sir, do you understand what has been living in your garage?" Raymond did not answer. I had never, in 41 years, seen him without an answer. He stood in the hall in his hose washing clothes, and he looked at the boards, and I watched him try to see them as she saw them, and I do not think he could. Not yet. But he could see her face. He could see that a woman with a doctorate and a museum had driven to his house and wept over the things he had priced at $5. And something in the arithmetic of that was starting to work on him. Slow, like frost coming out of the ground. We sat at my own kitchen table with the peas pushed aside, and Camille Reyes told me things I could not fully take in. "I don't want to borrow these, Mrs. Grant. I want the museum to acquire them, to buy them outright into what we call the permanent collection." And what does permanent mean exactly? It means they would belong to the people of this state forever. They could never again be sold, or split up, or scattered into somebody's trunk. They would be together, and they would be safe, for good. She folded her hands on my table. "I'm going to carry a formal recommendation to my acquisition committee, and I am going to fight for a number that reflects what this work truly is, not what it brought at a card table in your driveway." "What number is that?" And something in me braced, because I still half expected her to name a few $100, and I would have been grateful for it, for the collection as it stands. "The 41 boards upstairs." She looked at me level. "My recommendation will be $175,000. And a named exhibition. Your name, Mrs. Grant, cut into the wall of the museum. Say that to me again. Your name on the wall of the museum," she said. And that figure, for the 41 boards leaning against the wall upstairs. I had shelled peas for supper. Hold those 2 facts next to each other as I have held them every day since. That morning, I was a woman shelling peas whose husband had sold her life for $95, and by that afternoon, a museum wanted to pay 6 figures for what was left and hang my name on a wall. And the same 41 boards had been worth both things on the same day. Nothing about the boards had changed between the yard sale and the kitchen table. The only thing that had changed was who was doing the looking. Raymond sat down. He did not sit down at the table with us. He sat down on the step that goes from the kitchen into the garage, in the doorway of his beautiful gray room, and he put his head in his hands, and he stayed like that. A long time. I did not go to him. God forgive me, I did not have it in me yet to go to him. The acquisition took some weeks, as official things do. There were papers. Camille came back twice with a young man from the museum who photographed every board in a soft tent of light he set up in my living room. There was a day a letter came on heavy cream paper with the museum's seal at the top, and I read it standing at the mailbox. The same mailbox Raymond had leaned his cardboard sign against, and the letter said the acquisition committee had approved the recommendation in full, and it used the words permanent collection, and it used my name, Odessa Marie Grant, spelled right, and it invited me to the opening of an exhibition of my work in the fall. And there was the day the check came. I had never held a check like it. I sat in the car in the museum parking lot after the signing, and I held it in both hands. That check made out to my name, more money than I had ever held in my life. And the first thing I did, before I drove home, before I called my sister, before anything, was I bowed my head over that piece of paper, and I gave thanks. And then I did the arithmetic my mother taught me, which is the arithmetic of the 10th, and I knew before I left that parking lot exactly how much of it was going back to God's house. And I have never told Raymond that number, and I never will, because it was between me and the Lord. The first person I called from that parking lot, once my hands were steady enough to dial, was my baby sister Junie, back home in Taliga, who has never in her life been impressed by one single thing. Junie, sit down. I am sitting down. I'm shelling peas. What is it? You remember my paintings. Course I remember your paintings. Got 3 of them on my wall this minute. Why? What did Raymond do now? Because Junie has never cared for Raymond, not since the wedding, and she can smell that man's foolishness down a phone line from 100 miles off. A museum bought them, Junie, the State Museum. Every one that was left. There was a silence on the line. Then, careful, bought them how? Bought them with money? With money. How much money, Odessa? Don't you sit there and make me guess with peas in my lap. I told her the number. I heard the bowl hit her floor. Junie? You still there? I dropped my peas. Her voice had gone thin as paper. Odessa Marie, you remember Mama at that ironing board? She used to say, that child sees things the rest of us walk right past. And Daddy'd say, seeing don't pay the light bill, Cora. And Mama would say, it will. She'd say it will one day, you watch. She said that over the ironing my whole childhood. She had to stop and gather herself. And now here you are on the telephone telling me it finally did. I'm telling you Mama was right, and Daddy was wrong, and it only took the Lord 52 years to settle the argument. Junie started to laugh, that wet laugh that is just crying wearing its Sunday clothes. Lord have mercy. Does Raymond know? Raymond knows. And how is he taking it, Miss Museum? Tell me everything. He's sitting on the garage step with his head in his hands, Junie. And my baby sister, who has never been impressed by anything, laughed until I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Then she went quiet, and she said the thing that undid me right there in the parking lot with the check in my lap. You go find Mama's grave this week, she said, and you clean it off good, and you sit down there in the grass, and you tell her, out loud. You hear me, Odessa? Don't you tell me first. You go tell Mama. I did what Junie told me. That Saturday I drove the 100 miles back to Taliga with a whisk broom and a jar of zinnias, and I found my mother's stone in the cemetery behind Mount Moriah, up on the rise where the pecan trees are, and I swept the pollen and the grass clippings off of it, and I set the zinnias in, and then I sat down in the grass beside her as my sister told me to, and I told her. Mama, it's Odessa. I know it's been too long since I came out here, and I'm sorry for that. The wind moved in the pecans over my head. You remember what you used to tell Daddy over the ironing board? He'd say, "Seeing don't pay the light bill, Cora," and you'd say it will. It will one day, you watch. You said that my whole childhood. I pulled a few weeds from the base of the stone while I talked, because my hands have never learned how to be still and grieve at once. Well, it paid, Mama, a real museum up in the city. They're going to hang them all on a white wall with my name cut in brass. The river and the clothesline and the pecan picnic, every last one. And you are in the river painting, right there on the bank in your yellow Easter hat, singing me up out of that water. Every soul who walks in is going to look right at your face and never once know it's you. But I'll know. Long as I'm breathing, I'll know it's you. I put my hand flat on the warm granite. Raymond sold them for $5 apiece, Mama. And I can hear exactly what you'd say. You'd say, "Baby, that man never could see straight, and the Lord does not hold a blind man's bad aim against him. So don't you hold it either." I'm working on that part. It's slow going, but I'm working on it. I stayed there a while with my hand on the stone. You were right, and Daddy was wrong, and I drove 100 miles to say it to your face. You saw it in me before anybody. Thank you for that. Thank you for seeing it first. I sat with her until the light started going gold and then gray, and then I drove the 100 miles home in the dark, and I was not tired, not even a little. But the check and the letter and even that grave were nothing next to the night the doors opened. The exhibition opened on a Friday in October. And I want to take you into that room, because it is the room I had been walking toward for 40 years without knowing it was there. The museum had given my work its own hall, a long bright gallery with a ceiling made of glass, so that even at evening the last of the daylight came down white and clean over everything, and they had lit each board with its own warm lamp so the colors sang. My grandmother's clothesline, the dusk cotton field, the pecan tree picnic, 40 years of dawns up on white walls with room to breathe around each one, and beside each board a small card, and at the entrance to the hall, cut into a brass plate on the wall, 5 words, the Odessa Grant Collection. Permanent. I stood under that brass plate in a royal blue dress my sister had helped me pick, and I could not read it for the water in my eyes. They came in their hundreds. My whole church came, the deaconess board in their good hats, the pastor, the choir, the children I had taught to mix color, grown now, to shone among them with his own students. Miss Ella Fontaine came, 91 years old, on the arm of her granddaughter, and she found me in the crowd and held both my hands and said, "I told them. 40 years ago I stood in my door and told them what you were, and wasn't nobody listening but the Lord and me." Tanya came, the young mother, not so young now, and we stood together before the paintbrush field a long while without needing to say anything. A man in a beautiful charcoal suit found me by the pecan tree picnic, with a glass of something in his hand, and he told me he was a collector from the city, and he wasted no time. "Mrs. Grant, I'll be direct, because I suspect you're a direct woman. The picnic scene, the one with the ice cream churn, is there any world in which that one becomes available? I understand the collection went to the museum. But a private arrangement, a commission, a study, anything from your hand, I would pay very well. I flew in for this tonight. That's kind of you," I told him. "But they belong to everybody now. That was the whole point of letting them go. Everything has a number. He smiled the smile of a man for whom that has always been true. Just name yours. I thought about the fairgrounds 15 years back, the gray ponytail, product moves and money comes in. This was the same conversation in a better suit. Sir, I said, I spent 40 years being told my work was worth $5, and now here is a gentleman in a fine suit telling me everything has a number. I do believe you and that other fellow had a hold of the same wrong end of the same stick. Some things you can only keep by giving them away. You go enjoy that picnic. It's free to stand and look at, and looking was always the best part anyhow. He laughed, surprised, and raised his glass to me, and he left his card on the bench, and I left it lying there too. The young reporter with the bright light caught me near the door of the hall and held her little microphone up under my chin. Mrs. Grant, this must be overwhelming. 3 months ago, these sold for $5 each. Tonight they are in a permanent museum collection. How does that feel? I looked past her light at the whole bright room, my river hanging at the mouth of it, my church in their good hats, the grown children I had taught holding children of their own. You want the truth? I said. It does not feel like the paintings changed a bit. They were always exactly what they are. It feels like the world finally got quiet enough to look at them right. That is all any of us is really after, I think. Not to be worth more than we were, just to get looked at right, one time, by somebody who can actually see. She lowered the microphone. She had stopped asking her next question. My grandmother painted, she said, quiet, off the camera now. In the kitchen. Nobody ever made a thing of it, and she had to switch her light off for a minute, and I held that girl's hand right there by the door. And it was the truest interview I gave all night. And there was a line. This is the part I still cannot quite believe when I say it out loud. There was a line of people, strangers, wrapped along the gallery wall, holding the little printed programs with my picture on them, waiting for me to sign my name. Me, waiting for Odessa Grant to sign her name, the same name I had written in pencil on the backs of boards for 40 years, signing it now on the fronts of programs for people who had stood in line to ask. Camille Reyes stood up in the middle of that room, in a dress instead of her gray suit, and she quieted the crowd, and she told them the story. She told them all of it. She told them about a young picker and a $5 yard sale and a river baptism that would not leave her mind. And then she told them the part I had not known she knew, the part that made the whole bright room go still. Some of you have asked me how this collection came to the museum, she said. I'll tell you the truth, because Mrs. Grant has never been anything but truthful with me. These 41 paintings were sold 3 months ago at a yard sale in this artist's own driveway for $5 apiece, to make room in the garage for a golf cart. A sound went through the room. I don't say that to shame anyone. I say it because I want every person in this hall to understand how close we came to losing this, how close these paintings came to being scattered into attics and thrift stores and gone forever. I say it because the difference between $5 and a permanent place on these walls was never the paintings. The paintings were always this. The only thing that had to change was that somebody finally looked, and she reached down beside the podium and she lifted up, for everyone to see, a piece of cardboard. My husband's cardboard. The sign. Somehow she had gotten hold of it, and they had it now in a lit case at the end of the hall as part of the exhibition, the actual sign, and she held it up in her 2 hands. And there it was, in fat black marker, for the whole room and both news cameras to read. $5 each. Everything must go. And then Camille Reyes crossed the floor to where I stood, and she put into my hands the framed acquisition papers, and on top of them, a keepsake check the museum had made up for the occasion, large and clear, $175,000, the Odessa Grant collection, and she steadied it in my hands with her own because my hands were shaking, and the photographer's light went off, and behind me on the wall hung the cotton rose at dusk under their brass plate. And I looked up from the check to find the one face in that whole bright room I had been looking for and dreading to find. Raymond was standing in the doorway of the hall. He had come. I had told him he was welcome, with no idea whether he would, and there he was, in his good suit, standing at the very edge of the room, the same as he used to make my painting stand at the very edge of our house. He was not laughing now. He had one hand pressed flat against the side of his head, and he was looking from the brass plate to the check in my hands to the lit case at the end of the hall where his own cardboard sign sat under museum glass. And I watched my husband of 41 years do the arithmetic at last, the arithmetic he had refused for 4 decades, and I watched it break over him like cold water. 19 boards, gone into strangers' trunks, $5 apiece. A van load for $30 to a boy named Wyatt. And on the wall before him, in brass, the word permanent, and in his wife's shaking hands, a number with no end of zeros, and every bit of it made in a corner of a garage he had bulldozed for a cart. He did not come toward me. He could not. He stood in that doorway and he cried, my proud husband, in front of the church and the collectors and the cameras, one hand on his head and the other over his mouth, and for one moment across that whole bright room our eyes met. And neither of us said a word, because there was not a word invented that could cross that distance. And here is where you might expect me to have my moment. Here is the place in the story where the woman who was wronged gets to stand up straight in her good blue dress, with a museum behind her and a fortune in her hands, and let her husband have it, in front of everybody, all 41 years of it at once. I had earned that moment, if anybody ever earned one. Camille had left the podium open, and she looked at me, and the room was quiet, and every camera and every hat and my husband weeping in the doorway, all of it was waiting to see what Odessa Grant would say. Here is what was in me when I walked to that podium, and I am no saint, so I will not dress it up. There was a thing in me that wanted to point at that doorway. There was a whole speech in me, and it was a good one, and it had his name in it, and the word golf cart in it, and it would have brought the house down. I laid it down. I set it down a piece at a time as I crossed that floor, the same slow walk I had used carrying my boards out of his yard sale, and by the time I reached the microphone, my hands were empty of it. Because my mother did not raise me to win. My mother raised me to be free. And I have lived long enough to learn they are not the same thing. Winning would have chained me to that doorway and that man and that yard sale for the rest of my life. I wanted to be free. So this is what I said. I gripped the little wooden stand and I looked out at all those faces and I said, my mother's name was Cora. She cleaned other people's houses for 42 years. And she never owned a thing in her life that somebody hadn't used up first. And she used to tell me, Odessa, the Lord gave you eyes that catch things other people walk past, and that is not for showing off, that is a job. So I want to say first that everything on these walls belongs to her, because she is the one who taught me what my hands were for. I could hear people crying now, softly, all over the room. When I was a girl in Toliga County, we did not have much, but we had a river, and one Sunday when I was 9 years old, that river washed me clean, and I have spent 40 years trying to paint how the light came off that water, and not once have I gotten it right, and I will keep on failing at it until the Lord calls me home. Because some things you paint not to catch them, but to thank them. I looked at the cotton rose on the wall beside me. Every one of these was a thank you. I never meant for them to hang anywhere but in the houses of people who were hurting. If you are standing here tonight and you got one from me over the years, at a funeral or a sickbed or a hard birthday, know this. It was never charity, and it was never junk, no matter what anybody ever called it. It was me saying thank you to God for you, in the only language my hands know. And then I did the one thing I had promised myself I would do. I did not mention my husband. I did not name him. I did not shame him. But I looked, just for a second, at the doorway where he stood, and I said the last of it looking right at him, and everyone in that room knew exactly who it was for. There is a man I love very much who spent a long time believing that a thing has to have a price on it before it is worth anything. I am not up here to prove him wrong. The museum already did that, and I take no joy in it, none at all. I am up here to tell you that the price was never the point. What some people called clutter, God called a testimony, and he has been keeping the receipt the whole time. I let that sit one breath. Thank you for coming. Go home and hug whoever taught you your eyes were a job. I stepped back from the microphone, and the room stood up. All of them. And I never looked at the doorway again that night, because I had said my whole heart to it already, and there was nothing left to look for there. That is the thesis of my whole life, if I have one, and I have said it to you now, and I am only going to say it the once. Because my grandmother taught me that a testimony you have to keep repeating is a testimony you do not quite believe. I believe it. So I will let it stand. There was one board still missing. The whole world was on those white walls now, except the one that had opened the door. The creek baptism, the river that washed me as a girl, and the church singing my mother up out of the water. Her yellow Easter hat, bright in that crowd. That one was still sitting on a young picker's mantle across town, because Wyatt had never sold it. Camille had offered to buy it for the collection more than once, and Wyatt had said no every time. And for the life of me, I could not understand why. So about 2 weeks after the opening, I got his address from Camille and I drove over there myself. He lived in a little apartment over a tire shop, and he came down the outside stairs when I knocked. This tall young man, 26 years old, in a t-shirt with paint of his own on it. And when he saw it was me, he got so flustered he almost fell down the last 2 steps. Mrs. Grant, oh my. I didn't. Come up, it's not clean. I didn't know you were coming. We sat in his little front room, and there over his couch, in the place of honor, hung my creek. He had built a frame for it himself out of barn wood. Careful work. And he had hung a small light over it. He saw me looking. I know Dr. Reyes wants it for the museum, he said, fast, like he had been rehearsing. And I know it's yours, really. It was never mine. I paid $5 for it. I'll give it back. You don't even have to. Can I tell you something first? Go on, son. He rubbed his hands on his knees. The morning after I bought that van load, I couldn't sleep. I kept getting up to look at this one. And I'm not a church-going guy. Mrs. Grant, I want to be straight with you. But I sat right there on that couch at 3 a.m, and I looked at that old woman going down into the water with all those people singing, and I cried like a baby. And I don't even know why. First thing I've ever owned that made me feel like that. It's the reason I started painting myself. Bought the cheap set. Been at it every night. He looked at the floor. So Dr. Reyes keeps offering me money, and I keep saying no. Because you can't put a... It's not merchandise, I said. He looked up at me. Yeah, he said. Yeah, that's exactly it. And I sat in that boy's apartment over the tire shop, and I understood why the Lord had let my creek ride away in a stranger's van. It did not ride away. It rode to the one person in this whole city who needed it at 3 in the morning. A young man with paint on his shirt who did not have a river of his own yet and had to borrow mine to learn to cry. Raymond thought he was throwing my life in the trash. He was mailing it, first class, to exactly the address it was made for. And he never even knew he was the postman. "Wyatt," I said. "I did not come to take it back. I came to buy it, fair, as that dealer never got to and never deserved to. And then, I mean to give it to the museum, so that it hangs at the front of the whole collection where every person who walks in sees it first. Because this is the one that started all of this. But I will not let you give it to me for nothing, nor let the museum give you nothing either, because you are the only soul in this entire story who looked at my work and refused to name a price on it, and that is worth more to me than the whole of that check." He tried to argue. I did not let him. We agreed, in the end, on a fair sum, enough to matter to a young man over a tire shop. And I will not tell you the number, because it is between me and Wyatt the same way the tithe is between me and God. But I made him take it, and I made him promise me one more thing before I left. I made him promise to keep painting, and to sign the backs of his to God, the same as my grandmother showed me, and to give at least one away, every year, to somebody hurting, for free, forever, he promised. He walked me down to my car with the creek wrapped in a moving blanket in his arms, and he laid it in my back seat as careful as a pallbearer, and he stood there in the tire shop lot and watched me drive off with it, and I saw in my mirror that he was wiping his face again. I gave the creek to the museum the following week. I did not sell it to them. I signed a paper that made it a gift, from me, and I asked Camille for only one thing in return, which was that it hang at the very mouth of the hall, the first board you see when you walk in, so that the prayer that opened the door would hold the door open for everybody who came after. She hung it exactly there. There is a card beside it now, and the card does not say what the museum paid, because the museum did not pay anything, and it does not say what I painted it with, which was house paint and a dollar brush. The card says when I made it, and why. It says, "Painted the spring the artist's mother died." Given to the collection by the artist, so that the first thing every visitor sees is a thank you. Children stop in front of it. I have gone and stood in the back of the hall on quiet afternoons and watched them stop, and I do not tell them who I am. I just watch the river do to them what it did to Wyatt on that couch in the dark, what it did to me on the kitchen floor when I was 21, and I go home full. The news story did a thing nobody expected. When the reporter aired the piece, she showed the cardboard sign under the museum glass, the fat black marker still on it, and she told the county what had almost been lost, and something turned over in people's hearts. Within a month, they started coming back. The 19 boards that had gone into strangers' trunks began, some of them, to come home. A woman I barely knew from 2 streets over came up my porch steps one evening with something flat wrapped in a bath towel. "Mrs. Grant, you don't know me. I bought one of your paintings at that sale." She unwrapped it then and there on the porch. It was the cotton wagon, the one I painted from my uncle's field, the mules and the high white load. Gave $5 for it. I had it hanging in my laundry room. I have folded clothes in front of it every day for 3 months. "Then it's yours," I said. "You bought it fair." "No, ma'am." She pressed it into my hands. "I saw you on the news. I read that sign on the television, that $5 each, and I have not been able to look at this the same way since. I paid $5 for a laundry room decoration. That is not what this is. And I am not going to keep a woman's prayer up on my wall over a basket of dirty towels when it ought to be where everybody can see it. It belongs where they can all be together. Please, take it." She would not come in for coffee. She went back down my steps before I could argue her out of it, and I stood on my porch holding my uncle's cotton wagon, and I had to sit down on the step and hold it a while. A man who had bought one for his fishing cabin drove it 40 miles in the rain to hand it to Camille himself. The barber found one at his sister's house and brought it in on his day off. Not all of them came. Some are gone for good, out there in the world in kitchens and cabins, and I hope giving somebody their 3 in the morning, and I have made my peace with that. Because a testimony is not diminished by being scattered, it is multiplied. But enough of them came home that the museum had to add a second wall, and Camille put a little sign by that wall that says, "These works were returned to the artist by neighbors who had purchased them," and every time I read it, I have to sit down on the bench across from it for a minute. Now, the money. I know you are wondering about the money, because everybody does, and I will tell you plain, as I have told you everything else. The first 10th went to God's house, before I did anything else with $1 of it, and it fixed the church roof that had been catching rainwater in a mop bucket over the choir loft for 3 years. The second thing I did was I started a fund at the church, a real one, with papers, and I named it the Cora Grant Fund after my mother, and what it does is it buys paint and brushes and good paper for any child in that congregation who wants to learn. And it pays the fee for the ones who get into the summer art programs and cannot afford them. And Deshaun runs it for me, the boy who could not sit still for anything but a paintbrush, grown into a man who teaches other people's children now. I asked Deshaun to come by the house, and I put the papers on the kitchen table in front of him. "What's all this, Miss Odessa? Read the top of it." He read it. "The Cora Grant Fund." He looked up. "Cora, that was your mother. That was my mother. Keep reading." He read down the page, and I watched his jaw start to work. "This buys supplies. Pays the summer camp fees for the kids that can't." He set it down slow. "And you want me to run it?" "I want you to run it." "Why me? You got a whole deacon board could run a fund." "Because you know what it is to be the boy they send to the last stop," I said, "and you know what it is to get handed a brush instead of a scolding. There is not another soul I would trust with my mother's name on it." He was quiet a good while. Then he said, "You remember the brown dog?" "I remember the brown dog, Deshaun. I still got him. Hanging in my classroom, right there by the door, 22 years now." His voice had gone down into that rough place. "First thing my students see coming in. And every September, first day of school, I point at that board and I say, 'A church lady taught me there's no such thing as just brown, and she taught me I'm the one holds the sun.' I have told that story to every class I ever had. I never once knew if I'd get to tell you I tell it. You just told me." "Yeah." He stood up fast, like a man who has run clean out of floor. "I'm going to need a minute." And the grown teacher, who is not a crier, walked out and stood in my driveway with his back to the house, and I let him have it. Because there are things a man has to do with the sky over him and nobody watching. Cora Grant washed other people's floors for 42 years so her daughter could have eyes. Now her name buys eyes for children she never got to meet, and it is a boy she never met who hands them the brush. I do not think a bank account has ever been put to a use that pleased me more. I did not buy a big house. I did not buy a car with the money, though the one I have got is 15 years old. What I bought, if you must know, is time. Time before the sun that belongs to nobody else in this world. Because the third thing that happened, the thing I did not see coming, happened right there on my own porch, about 6 weeks after the opening, on an evening in November when the light was going down orange behind the water oak like it does, like it did in Miss Ella's painting, and my husband came out and sat down in the chair next to mine, and he left the radio off, and he said nothing about the cart, and after a long while he said my name. "Odessa, I'm here," I said. "We're all right now, you know." He said it to the yard, not to me. Money-wise, that check changes things. We could travel some. I could build you a real studio, a proper one, heat and air, big windows, top of the line. Anything you want, Odessa, you just name it and it's done. Is that what you came out here to say to me? He was still a moment. "No," he said. "No, that's not it." "Then, leave the money out of your mouth, Raymond. Money is the one thing in this house that never once understood me. Don't you go sending it out here to do your apologizing for you." That landed on him. He nodded, slow, and he folded his hands between his knees, and he looked out at the yard like men look when the thing they have to say is too heavy to carry and look at you at the same time. "I sold the cart," he said. I did not say anything. I had noticed the garage was empty again that morning and had wondered. "Fella from the club gave me a fair price. I don't." He stopped. He started over. "I never once, in 41 years, got up at 5 in the morning to do anything. You know that? Not once. And you did it every day. I used to hear you get up and I'd think, there she goes, out to fool with that paint, and I'd roll over. Every day, Odessa, 40 years running. And I rolled over. Raymond, let me get it out. I'm no good at it. And if you stop me, I'll lose my nerve." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I stood in that museum, and I read your name up on that wall in that brass. And I read that sign, my sign, the one I wrote, sitting there under the glass like it was evidence. And it is. It's evidence. It's a man who lived next to something holy for 40 years running and priced it at $5 because he was too busy worrying what Bill Dabney thought of the garage." His voice broke on the word garage, and he waited until it came back. "I sold your mother, Odessa, that river with your mother in it. I sold your mother for $5 to make room for a golf cart, and I laughed about it at the club, and there's no way to." He stopped. "I'm sorry is not a big enough word, but it's the one I've got, and I've never in my life meant it more. I'm sorry. I have been the fool in this house these 40 years, and I called you the fool the whole time. I have imagined that apology for most of my married life. I want to tell you it felt like winning. It did not feel like winning. It felt like watching a man finally set down something heavy he had been making me carry, and being glad for him and tired in my bones at the same time. I let the quiet sit between us until the orange was almost gone out of the sky. And then I said the thing I had decided, weeks before, that I would say if this day ever came, because I had learned by then that mercy without a boundary is just a door you prop open for the same trouble to walk back through. Raymond, I forgive you. I want you to hear that first, because it is true, and because I did not come to it easy. I came to it on my knees. I forgive you." He started to speak, and I put my hand up. "I am not finished. I forgive you, and things are going to be different now, and I need you to hear the different part as clearly as you heard the forgive part. You are welcome at that museum any day it is open. You are my husband, and I am not going anywhere. I made a vow, and I meant it, and I mean it still. But you are never again going to decide what my hands are worth. Not the price of them, not the point of them, not one thing about them. That decision left this house on the day it went out to the mailbox, and it is not coming back. When I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, you are going to roll over the same as always, only now you will know what you are rolling over next to. Can you live inside those lines?" He was quiet a long time. Then he said, I can. I want to. And then, softer, where are you going to paint? I tore the garage up. I ruined your corner. You are going to build it back, I said. Not for me, for you, so that every time you hang a light or set a shelf, you are doing with your hands the opposite of what you did with them before. And the east window stays. That light is not yours to give me, Raymond. It was never yours to give or to take, but the shelves you can build. And I will let you, because a man needs a way to say he is sorry with something besides his mouth. He built it back. It took him the better part of a winter, and he is not a craftsman, so the shelves came out a little crooked, and I would not trade those crooked shelves for gold. The golf cart floor is still down, that battleship gray with a sparkle in it, because it turned out to be a fine floor to paint on, easy to wipe. My workbench is back in the east corner, and under the bed the blue suitcase sat all that winter, until the morning the shelves were done, and Raymond carried it out to the garage himself, and set it on the bench, and stood there not knowing what to do with his hands, and I opened it. And my brushes were exactly where I had laid them, the night I gave up. The good sable ones, and the worn-down bristle ones, waiting. And I picked up the smallest one, and I have gotten up before the sun every morning since. Something started about a month into those crooked new shelves that I still do not quite know how to hold in my hands. It was a Tuesday, black dark, and I was at my bench with my little lamp on and the east window still full of night. And I heard the kitchen door open behind me. Raymond was standing there in his robe with 2 cups of coffee. Didn't know if you took it out here, he said. Made it anyway. Raymond, it is 5:10 in the morning. I know good and well what time it is. He set 1 cup down on the corner of the bench, careful, well away from the paint. 40 years I heard you get up in the dark, and I rolled over. Figured it was about time I came out and saw what was worth getting up for. There was no chair out there for him. I did not get up to hunt one, and he did not ask for one, and I believe he understood that this corner was mine, and he was a guest in it, and that this was exactly how it ought to be. He stood a respectful step back and watched me lay the first blue into a sky. You want to know what it's going to be? I said. No, he said. I want to watch you find out. And I will tell you, in 41 years of marriage, that was the first thing that man ever said about my painting that I wrote down in my heart to keep. He drank his coffee and never put one word of his hands on the board, and when the cup was empty he said, well, as he does, and went in to dress. He does it most mornings now, not every one. Some mornings a man needs his sleep, and I am glad enough for the dark to myself. But most mornings there is a cup set down careful on the corner of my bench, and a man standing back in the gray light watching his wife do the very thing he spent 40 years rolling over on, and never one time any more telling her what it is worth. I am painting a new one now. It is the museum, the bright hall with the glass ceiling, and the people standing in front of the walls, and if you look close, third from the left, there is an old woman in a yellow hat who never got to see any of it, and there is a man at the far edge of the picture, small, standing in a doorway, and I have painted him in the light this time. Because that is where he lives now, in the light, at the edge. Welcome. So let me ask you the thing I have been turning over since that evening on the porch, and I am asking you straight, because you have stayed with me this whole way, and you have earned the question. If you had come home to that empty garage and that cigar box of $5 bills, if it had been your life set out on a card table by the road with a marker sign on it, and if the man who did it sat down beside you on the porch 6 weeks later and told you he was sorry with the whole of his broken heart, could you have forgiven him? Not should you have. Could you have? I have told you what I did. I do not hold it up as the only right answer, because I know some of you are carrying a wound that has no porch apology coming, and I have no business standing here in my blessing, telling you what to do with your pain. But I would truly love to know. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. Forgive or walk, and tell me why, and be gentle with each other in there. Because everybody typing has a garage of their own. And if this story sat with you, if you have ever made a thing with love and had it called clutter, do me one small kindness and subscribe. And stay for the next one. Because there is always a next one. And there is always another 5 o'clock still to come. And there is always, always, more light coming than you think. Thank you for staying with me. Go and hug whoever taught you your eyes were a job.